an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Holy Sister, chapters 6, 7, 8, and 9. In these chapters, it just gets dropped on me that Abbess Glass is dead now. It just gets dropped on me. You guys. Oh, I am disgusted. I am so irritated. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Martin for commissioning this episode. Martin is here in the chat. So, yeah, y'all, I wasn't ready for that shit at all. Martin says, I'm not a fan that it happens off screen. This is one of those things where I'm not entirely sure how I feel. On the one hand, Abbess Glass feels like such a seminal character. She's just, such a fucking badass. As it says in the book, she is the heart of Sweet Mercy. And in a lot of ways, she feels like the heart of the first two books. Martin says, technically we found out last chapters, but you might not notice it. I didn't notice it. Is it mentioned when she talks about how Wheel is waiting to see if people are in the, sneaking between the hallways? Because the fact that it's Wheel that is the Abbess now, it occurred to me that maybe her name was brought up early and I just didn't. At the Blade trial, it's mentioned how she embarrasses Abbess Wheel. Nope. Didn't see it. I'm even more angry now. So on the one hand, the fact that she dies off screen is disappointing, not what one would expect. On the other hand, there's something about it that feels like it's sort of strange. I have this respect for authors who kill people in ways that you don't expect, but here I can't even really say that it applies, because normally what I would say is you don't always get to say goodbye to people, and you whenever an author is willing to let a character go without you getting to say goodbye, and I say goodbye in quotes, for me, sometimes that really works because it underscores how impermanent everything is and how much you just don't really get, the closure that is so often talked about in books and movies and whatever. But here, what's so weird about it is that Nona was there when Abbess Glass died. So that explanation doesn't even really work. And thus, I'm kind of left wondering why it was handled this way. Is it just because we couldn't, because maybe the author logistically wasn't able to work it in because we have to jump to a period exactly 3 years ahead when all this other stuff is happening. And Abbess Glass is going to have to be dead at that point in order for all this to work. So otherwise, it was just going to be way too long and drawn out, which I could see that being a problem. If it just, I feel like there might have been a way around that, but maybe the way around it wasn't elegant or just didn't feel quite right. And so I'm willing to give the benefit of the doubt here. I mean, in a way, we at least do get to see her pass away because of this flashback. Flashback seems like too mild a word for what exactly happens there. But it's really interesting anyway, because Nona is subjected to this weird sort of gauntlet. And it really reminded me, spoilers for The Dark Tower, at the end of The Dark Tower, the tower itself is something that has just been calling to the hero the entire time. And he finally gets there and he begins to climb. And there's this huge staircase inside that leads all the way to the top. And as he begins to climb, he sees all these different scenes from his life. And as he finally ascends all the way to the top, it becomes clear the tower sends him back to the beginning. And he has to relive his life and do it all again. And maybe gets the chance to make better choices this time. But it's sort of it's oddly like a little bit of a torture because he doesn't want to live it all again. He doesn't want to do this again. Yet at the beginning of his like retread, apparently, he doesn't exactly remember. He just sort of like has these instincts and weird deja vu moments that to him are inexplicable, but rereading it, we know it's because he's done this before. And the way that this gauntlet is sort of described, especially when we talk to Arabella, it sounds very similar to that for her. It's this odd series of temptations and moments where maybe you're going to be able to make a change. Maybe you're going to be able to save somebody that wasn't able to be saved the first time. And doesn't that seduce you and make you want to step off the path? And it's all simply happening as it happened. There isn't a way to change it, but it looks like there might be. So you get seduced into it. And it's something that I don't feel I would be very good at resisting. You know, there's a lot that this is one of those things where people try and say that you shouldn't live with regrets, and that if you have regrets, you should learn that like everything that happened brought you to where you are now. But having regrets and wishing things happened differently are not always the same thing. I wish I acted differently at certain times. I don't wish that things hadn't gone the same way. So in my opinion, if you're a person living with no regrets, literally none, that's a you problem. That means that you aren't learning and you aren't growing as a person, and you aren't looking at your past and realizing that maybe you were in the wrong sometimes. Maybe you behaved incredibly maturely sometimes. Maybe you were really hurtful, whether you meant to be or not, a few times. And if you can't feel some regret for your past actions, then there's nothing informing your present actions to make you wiser, you know, and more conscious. And there's just so much that I feel like could trip me up in a like sort of obstacle course like this. And it would just be brutal. I don't know. I would hate this. But I am jumping ahead. We will get there. We start off with chapter 6, present day. And this is with Kettle. And Kettle is basically, she's out doing like recon and like assassinations. But she still has this thread bond with Nona. I don't remember, guys, if this is discussed or if you can tell me or not. Once a thread bond has been formed, there's no way to undo that. Is that right? That it's just permanent and that's all there is to it? That feels really like I would hate that, man. You know, I wouldn't mind having this for a time, but I feel like something without an expiration date where I can't get out of it ever. Oh, no, thank you. Do not sign me up for that. So she comes across this Sithrall, basically like attack victim, this village. And as she comes to the Hope Church, I started to be like, oh my God, is this like the place that Nona was at, where she, had made her journey in the previous book. And it does indeed turn out to be. Martin says, I think it might be possible, but it's stupidly difficult. Like, Kettle still has her shadow bond with Saphira, who stabbed her. I forgot about that. Kettle's bonded to too many people, girl. Stop it. So it's this village that has been attacked, and pretty much everybody is dead. Everybody, children even. And there's this awful like scene of this woman who clearly dragged herself over to her daughter who is dead. And she died before she managed to like get her or at least hold her. And there's something so cruel about that. So Nona is watching all of this. And she is asleep, but like, you know, that makes her sort of, I think, a little bit easier for Kettle to access sometimes. So Kettle is doing this in order for Nona to see it. That is the impression Nona's getting. Like, you can get that sort of feeling through the bond. And she's looking around at this like area where there are some officers who are asleep. And Nona is really thinking like, you know, they have these guys sleep in better places wearing like furs and things that the others don't get. It really makes officers stand out in a way that they otherwise wouldn't, which means that you know exactly who to go after, which isn't a super smart way to operate. And I was like, that's a good point, actually. So she is at this church finally, and this is when Nona realizes where she is, White Lake. And that these people are way closer than they had suspected. They could be here in 5 days, the whole army. If they decided to go all out, some of them could be there in less than half of that. And as she is sitting there in this church using shadow to keep herself hidden, this thing happens that I have no interest in this. I don't want it. I don't like it. I am not on board with it. And I would please like to cancel my subscription to the thing. Kettle pressed herself to the church wall, pulling darkness to herself as if drawing a breath. The night entered her as ink soaks into blotting paper. There, out across the graveyard, a pale, questing tentacle, almost flat to the ground, insubstantial as mist. Another, yards long, snaking out between the graves. A pain spider, some creature of the soft men in service to the Sithrall battle queen Adoma. Rumor had it that they bred such monstrosities, releasing demons from the black ice into unholy alliance with flesh. No, sir. No, sir. No, ma'am. No, thank you. I don't want it. At one point, the tentacle gets kind of close to her, and it says, even at that distance, her skin sang with echoes of the agony its touch would bring. Which, when you call it a pain spider, I thought that was just a figure of speech. That, this spider would attack you, and that it would be very painful once it attacked you in the way a monster attacks you. But apparently it has more of an ability than that. It feels like a giant puppet harm, which just, who sanctioned this? I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. This is so incredibly creepy. Oh my God, no. And not surprisingly, Nona wakes up flipped out and can't fall asleep again for the rest of the night. So we go back to, we jump ahead from here to the next day with Jula and Ara and Nona talking about this book and whether it actually exists. This book that they want apparently to try and control the moon is what we're doing here. Now, I would like to mention, and this is not necessarily of interest to anybody but me, But at the end of this evening, I'm going to be covering the magicians. And the magicians are looking for a page from a book that will teach them how to control the moon. And I just can't with that symmetry. That is so funny to me. Anyway. So, yeah, this moment is really like... The thing that I find so funny is that Jula keeps on being like, I don't think we should do this. Well, maybe we should. No, maybe we shouldn't. And it turns out that their whole like theft is going to be based on something that Abbess Glass said before she died and some assumptions that Jula is making. Now, they are informed assumptions. I do not mean to cast aspersions on Jula. It's not like she's just pulling this out of her ass. She simply is very astute and she has like really good observation to support what she's claiming here. But basically she says that it's clear that Sister Pan has a copy of this banned book. Let's see. Actually, I think she said it's not banned. It's forbidden. Yeah. Banned books get burned. Forbidden ones are just forbidden. And she says Sister Pan quotes from it when she's talking about the lost cities. And I can tell that's what she's quoting because Aquinas, who wrote it, has a very distinctive prose style. And this is one of those things that when you're talking to people who don't have the background that you have in a certain subject and you're trying to explain to them why you know that a thing is a thing, it sounds like you're just making it up. I understand the reticence of her friends here, but being somebody who tends to be into like getting really involved in whatever hobbies I'm in to the point where I make connections like that, I know how that can be, where to you, it's just so obvious and makes total sense. And the people you're talking to are unwilling to take it on faith that you know what you're talking about. And like, on the one hand, you understand why and you kind of respect that. And on the other hand, you're just like, fucking listen to me. Now, it turns out in the end that really, out of the three of them, the one with the most misgivings is actually Ara. Jula she's afraid. She's mostly afraid because she worries they're going to get caught. Not really because she doesn't think that it's the right thing to do, which I think is a really important distinguishing feature of her fear. She's certain about what she's telling them. She is certain that Pan has the book. It's just that they're taking a huge risk here and she doesn't know what will happen if they get caught with it because again, it is forbidden and that's a bad fucking deal. So I really enjoy, the fact that when they come out of there, Jula is like, oh my God, you guys took so long. I didn't know what I was going to have to do. I thought I was going to go need to tell them that you were still up there. I didn't know what had fucking happened to you. Just like, man, I feel like that's one of those things that gets very little because it's not interesting, of course, to a writer or a reader. But when you sit back and look at the roles that people play, the worst one by far is being the person who has to wait on the sidelines and hope for things to go okay. Number one worst. Forget it. I would hate that role. And that's what she kind of has to do is play lookout and just hope that things are going okay with no ability to tell from her end if it has gone okay or not. This isn't like doing a bank heist where you can look through the window of the bank and see your friends robbing it inside and know whether or not they're doing all right. This is solid walls and everything is in this sort of weird spirit level that she can't just look into easily. It's really props to Jula for being a G and just completely sticking it out until the end, despite all of her worries and misgivings. So the one that turns out to really be much more unconvinced is Arabella. And when I say unconvinced, I don't mean that she thinks this is the wrong thing to do. It's not the book itself. If it were real, if she had a guarantee, I think that she would be completely on board. But that's not where they live, they don't have that. There isn't a guarantee that this is going to work. It's just this like theory that Nona and Jula have kind of cobbled together from things that they have heard and read. And granted, the information that Nona has, it's understandable why she believes in it so much. But like Arabella, as soon as they open the little kind of chest that contains the books, it turns out at the bottom, it's clear that they are invading somebody's like really private stash, their private property, in a way that didn't feel quite as apparent to them until they opened it. Like it was seeing the things really that suddenly made them go, oh, this is not okay. And I completely understand how that can be, you know, it's like going through somebody's underwear drawer, you know, you just like, I'm not supposed to be here. And so what Nona does is lie to Arabella about the fact that she got a vision from the ancestor telling her that this was the thing to do. And this is one of those moments where I'm like, I really wish that she didn't have to lie to her friend. But I also wish that her friend would listen to her about a thing when Nona isn't known for doing things for no, like, payoff. I want to say she isn't reckless. I feel like despite the crazy shit Nona's done, I don't think she is reckless. Sometimes she gets caught up in a bit of a blood frenzy. That doesn't usually lead to recklessness exactly. She's just somebody who, like, is incredibly committed to the things that she decides to do. It's just, for her, once she has set her mind to a thing, you just don't turn back again, you know? So I feel like Arabella should have known better coming into this than to think that they can be here with the chest opened in front of them and then try and be like, oh, this isn't right, we should leave. You're with Nona. You're not turning back now, girl. If you wanted to turn back, you shouldn't have come into the door at all. You shouldn't have done it. As it turns out, she probably didn't even need to come because Nona is able to get into the room and open the chest without Arabella's help. And that was something that I found kind of surprising, that it turned out Nona didn't actually need Arabella to come with her, really. But I'm getting ahead of myself, of course, because the thing is that they figured out the book is likely going to be in the Path Tower. Sister Rule taught that the Path Tower was the oldest building on the Rock of Faith, predating the convent by centuries. Given that all save the top and bottommost rooms lacked doors or windows, Nona supposed it had been built for a powerful path mage, though no records remain to name the first occupant. She approached the east entrance, apprehension rising. It wasn't as if they were about to attempt the impossible. Every novice with ambitions to be a mystic sister had to enter the third room unaided. It was part of the path test. Maybe all of it. Nona would choose the red habit, not the sky colors of the mystics, but she wanted to pass the path test even so. So they're talking and Nona says we know two things. Firstly, it's all about path. Otherwise, Joelle would have cracked it months ago. Joelle Namsis couldn't take 2 steps on the path if you threw her at it, which I didn't know that she had that hindrance. And that's pretty interesting. Like, she's so good with thread work. I had sort of thought that she'd have to be able to get to the path and set foot on it in order to do thread work. Evidently not. And secondly, we know that it must be different for each person. Otherwise, Pan would just have trained the 3 of us together. Which is what we kind of wind up seeing a little bit later on, is the gauntlet that Nona goes through versus the gauntlet that Ara goes through are very, very different. And I have a theory on that. Ara is on this, like, she's in this tower, passing by scenes from her life and having to not step off into them, right? And she tells Nona it was really hard to not do it. But, you know, she managed to resist and continue on. Nona, her experience is that she turns and is in the scene already. It's not like she's passing it and there's an option to not engage. She is in the scene without being able to control it and doesn't choose it, and they simply come at her. And I think that the reason for this is because Nona is probably, there's a couple things, and I don't want to make too many generalizations about Arabella, so it may not be correct, but my theory is Nona has experienced more horrific things than Arabella has, and that Nona is still more attached to them and how they turned out than Arabella is. I feel like Nona lives with a lot more immediate guilt and is plagued by memories of what went down and how she could have done differently than Arabella is. And that's not, in saying that, I'm not insinuating that Arabella doesn't care as much as Nona. I'm saying that Arabella is better at letting go of the past than Nona might be. And again, like I said, just a theory. But some of us, we can move on and accept that we did badly or something terrible happened, and yet it happened, and that's all there is to it, and there isn't really much more to be done. And as much as we regret the outcome or wish we had done differently, we are able to be like, but I'll do better, and look forward. I get the feeling Nona is just not as good at that as a lot of people are, because she carries this weight of what happened to her as a child, you know, and the way that she was sold, and what happened to her village, and all of these like true horrors that Arabella, growing up with the privilege that she has, I just don't think maybe she has that kind of weight on her, you know? I don't know but it just feels like because Nona doesn't have control over what appears, and because she's plunged into it in such a way that it feels like she's reliving it and can make it go in a different way, it's made into more of a test for her than it is for Joelle, than it is for Arabella, because of that being something that for her is a real obstacle, and something that she will genuinely have to like work to overcome, that hanging on. And a lot of us could use a little, you know, guidance on how to not hang on, let's be honest. But yeah, I thought this was really interesting. I really liked the whole idea of each of them having in general a similar theme to what they have to get through, but that it's really different for each of them in the way it's set up and how they like felt it. It just makes a lot of sense to me that for some people this is going to be easier than others, you know? So there's this moment here that I wanted to read. Kettle had said the end would come in months rather than years. The Grey Sister scouted for the Emperor's armies both east and west. Adoma's hordes seemed to be endlessly replaced, ready to spend their lives for the Battle Queen, and she ready to spend them. Scherzel had all but filled the Grand Pass with Cithril corpses, and still they had flooded over the Grampians. The ferocity of Scherzel's defense and the cleverness of her stepped retreat had been what forced the Emperor to overlook reports of her planned treason. Scherzel had organized and directed the ongoing attacks in the mountains to continually disrupt Adoma's supply lines. That and a scorched earth withdrawal had slowed Adoma's advance from a charge that would have reached Verity in weeks to a crawl that had taken almost 2 years to get just over halfway. But like with thin ice, a slow creaking could become a sudden plunge into freezing death, and the Empire's defense had started to fracture weeks ago. Emperor Crucical needed his sister. Yikes. I didn't realize that it was going to be so easy for Scherzel to sort of shed what happened. I'll be honest, I didn't expect a big comeuppance for her. And compared to like the Toxis men, I was really not as concerned about her as I was about their fates, because they were so personally like distasteful and horrifying to me. But she is one of those like threats that's big enough that she feels a little bit difficult to take seriously as a threat to my people, because they haven't even really met her, so it's hard for me to put them in the same place. And the fact that she's like fighting in response to these attacks now, while yes, she does want power, it does seem like she's a decent leader in this sense. She's managing to like defend well enough that part of me is like, remind me why the Emperor is the Emperor again, because it seems like maybe she could have deposed him and done a better job, because it seems that he needs her really bad. And I don't really get the feeling from that summary that he was doing his shit too well. I get into one of these places where I'm like, why are we defending the Empire exactly? What is it that makes the Empire better to live in than a place that the Skithral rule, that the Adoma, the Battle Queen rules? Like, yeah, the Adoma seems ruthless and a cutthroat, but as we see when we're in Kettle's mind a little bit later, Kettle's just like, she makes a lot of sense. If I were one of the Skithral, I would follow her. Like, this is just basic survival shit. We happen to be in the way of their surviving, and that's unfortunate for us, but that doesn't mean that any of the points that she's making are less valid. And that seems to be sort of how Scherzel is, and that seems to be, honestly, the way that the Empire tends to operate. The Empire has not been a kind place. There is nothing about it that, to me, reads like it's better than what the Skithral are doing, how they live. Nona got sold to a slaver, basically, who was able to sell her to fighting pits where children are killed. And nobody bats an eye about that. It's completely fine. And there are people who are roaming around still trying to kill her because of her defending herself from like what I think was going to be, if not a sexual assault, at the very least a fatal assault. And there really wasn't much done to prevent these guys. It was sort of like a blind eye was turned to it for the most part. And, we have this psychopathic archbishop or whatever he was called, who, yeah, he was removed from his position, but then he gets made into like the abbot of a boys' school. I'm just saying this whole place is rotten, and I'm not really rooting for our people to stop the Skithral, because the Empire doesn't seem to care about its own people. They don't seem like they ever have. So I am not entirely sure why I should worry about the Skithral, other than the fact that they're killing everybody with no like hostages taken, which, if the Empire were put in the position of the Skithral, they would doubtless do to them too. So it's not to me that the Empire is more moral. It's simply that they are lucky in their positioning, literally on a map. That's it. They just got this privilege of being in this good spot, and the Skithral have nowhere left to go. But otherwise, there doesn't seem to be a material difference to me. And I'm interested to see if that's like explained, if I'm given a good reason, or if Nona begins to think the same thing. I don't know. But it just doesn't really feel like the Empire is what we want to defend. It feels more like these people in these villages that are getting absolutely creamed are the ones that we want to defend. And I don't feel that the Empire is concerned about them as fatalities so much as they are, oh, well, that was a loss of territory, and they are encroaching further in. That to me feels much more accurate to how they're looking at things versus the loss of the people themselves. Because like I said, Scherzel came in and burned down the entire village that Nona was from because Nona got away. And what makes that different? I don't know. So I'm sitting here kind of, I feel like my views on what happened in these chapters are really heavily influenced by what's happening in our country right now. I'm recording this on election day. And it's one of, like, I'm in that sort of position now where people are talking about how, like, our society is beginning to sort of collapse in the United States. And they're really bemoaning this loss. And really, when we look at how our society has served us, it isn't a loss. Like, if you have been one of the people who isn't privileged, you aren't going to feel the loss the way that people who had a lot already will. And I just don't really have it in me to worry about that. I'm worried about my, like, marginalized friends, you know? Those are the people that I want better for. And pulling down the way that society has functioned and rebuilding it is the only way things are going to be okay for them, evidently, because society just doesn't like to adapt to these sorts of things. So I feel like that's part of my problem, is like coming at this with, especially the description of like the cracking of ice can suddenly break. That's how it feels right now. It feels like everything has been sort of ramping up to election day. And I know so many people are incredibly nervous about what the fallout is going to be, because there is a sense that no matter who wins the election, there is going to be violence in response to it. And I think that tends to be true. And I think it's going to be really telling how it goes down. And I'm extremely worried for my friends, because I have people out here who have to go out and walk through the world in black skin, and that just makes them a target for certain people. And they just have to go to work and act like that threat isn't there every day. Like, this isn't like the landscape of our entire country hasn't just shifted completely. And it feels like we are on run ice right now. And that cracking is happening, and we're about to plunge through it. And who knows when it's going to be? Will it be the day after the elections? Who knows? But as much as I'm dreading how it's going to go down, part of me really feels like maybe this is necessary. Maybe we have to go through this, because clearly shit hasn't been working. We built the entire country on a foundation of murdering indigenous people and enslaving other indigenous people. And we thought that that was somehow going to remain standing. That foundation is blood. It's cracked. It's broken. And we built a country on it. And now we're surprised that it's not working out. Like, you know, so anyway, like I said, I was really reading this section and wanting to be convinced that the Empire was a better option. All that it is at the moment is, this is where Ara and Nona and all the others are from. And so they defend it in a way that is more territorial and like tribalistic in its way than it is motivated by necessarily like reason and rationale. And we see later when Nona is with Zol and she's like thinking about how all the stories she heard about the Sithral are, oh, they eat babies, they burn their prisoners alive, they, you know, worship devils. She's realizing how many of these stories are likely not true, but she can't help but think about them. It's like hard for her to shake this indoctrination that she grew up with, you know? Martin says, it's certainly a better option for our characters, but for the average commoner, who knows? Yeah, and like that's kind of where I'm at, where I'm like, they're doing what they can, I think, really, just to keep themselves alive is their thought. I don't think it's really that, though. Actually, now that I say that, I was about to say to keep themselves alive is too selfish a motivation for somebody like Nona, because she's able to risk her life at the drop of a hat if it's her friends are in danger. She's doing this to save everybody else that she cares about, because she holds a lot of guilt over the fact that she hasn't saved other people that she cared about. So anyway, okay. So this is when, as they head inside, they run into Abbess Wheel, who is looking for Sister Pan and is just being really like weird about it to me. I felt like there was something going on with that, and I don't know. I have no idea what that is. If there is something secret, if she was maybe not supposed to be here, and this is why she's so like angry to see Nona. We know she doesn't like Nona, but it felt like there was more than just, oh, I don't like you, in that normal, like, she just hasn't approved of her. And it felt like she got caught maybe doing something she wasn't supposed to do. I have no idea. So Nona has this moment where she goes down to the first floor, and there's all of these portraits that are hanging up that are like supposed to be different, I think, path walkers. I'm trying to find the spot. A new portrait hanging amid the others just to the right of the door. Oh, yes. And there's a bunch of them that Nona really is like interested by. There's one of a woman who has like red hair, and it turns out that her hair's like flames. There was something familiar about the woman, that her face pinched but friendly, high cheekbones, blue eyes. She had pale hair curling close to her skull, but with wisp after wisp trailing off into the air to create a faint haze of threads that filled the space around her. Nona cocked her head. The nun looked 30, at least, and yet... Hessa? Nona's eyes blurred with tears. How? She bowed her head, wiping at her face. I am so curious about this. So Ara says the same thing later about how there is a portrait at the, with the others that wasn't there before. And who did she see? Was it the same person? Was it not? I'm assuming not. Why does Hessa look older than she did? Because it's almost maybe like Nona seeing what she wished could have happened, Hessa having grown and able to pursue her path fully. But yeah, this is when we begin the journey into all of these memories. So we get the memory of Abbess Glass. And she tells Nona that the ancestors' tree is something humanity planted, and that we have watered with our deeds, our cares, with each act of love, even with our cruelty. Cling to it, Nona. And this is one of those moments that I can't help but be like, did she die naturally, though? Because it sounds like everybody seems to believe that it was a natural death, but I have just a hard time with that, because Abbess Glass was wanted dead by so many people, and I can't imagine that she was allowed to die a natural death. It's just hard for me to believe that, So Nona takes a step forward, focusing on a ficus tree. And she comes across the scene of High Priest Jacob swinging his staff and at that mule, which she wasn't even there for this, was she? And this is a weird one for her to have such... It's through Hessa that she... Okay, yeah. Martin says, no, she saw it through Hessa. Okay, so this is still just such a distinct memory for her because of that connection. She could no more tear herself from the scene before her than rip the skin from her body. And then we get this line that ripped me apart a little bit. I'm not going to lie, you guys. I actually highlighted this and sent it to Rashawn, and apparently I'm in good company because it says that like over 100 people highlighted this line. So first it says Marcus, impossibly young, struggled at the limit of his strength to escape the grip of the high priest's guard, wild in his passion. And then we go to the line, Giljon stood at the cart, held by bonds of the sort that no child can see, the kind made of debt and of a bitter understanding of the world's truths, the kinds that tear at a life as you struggle against them and leave wounds that won't heal. And I sent that to Rashawn, and she replied with, wow, that is fucking dark. And I was like, yeah, that just felt like a real word for me today. That is such a great way to describe it, bonds. You know, there's just a lot of discussion about what happens as we get older and our feelings about life. And it's not like we can't overcome the cynicism and this bleakness that we often begin to take on. But it's harder and harder. It gets heavier, you know. So at this point, Nona realizes this isn't real. Because this scene should have had rain in it, and it's not raining. And she is able to leave the scene because she recognizes that. And I'm not going to go through every single scene, but there is the scene of her town being burned down. She comes across her mother's body. She is with Darla again as Darla is dying. The scenes, it's just like, you know, one after another of some of the worst moments of her life. And then she sprang to her feet and threw herself across the burning hall, even as the door upon which her eyes were fixed started to fade from view. And she finally gets through, and she's by herself, and she says it wasn't true, any of it. Some of it was true, though. Abbess Glass had died, and Sweet Mercy would never be the same again. So then we go to chapter 7. I only have 15 minutes left. I am screwed. I talked about a lot that happens later, though, already. And a lot of what happens in chapter 7 is Zol and Nona traveling, which I don't really need to get into too much, but they are being pursued hotly, and Zol keeps thinking that different things they do are going to throw off their pursuers, and it never really works out as neatly and tidily as she intended it to. And Nona is realizing that they're heading into Sithral territory, which Zol is doing on purpose because she thinks that means the soldiers won't follow them there. And she begins to think of all of the stories that she heard about what the Sithral are like. And we hear about what Queen Adoma looks like, which is really interesting. Kettle was not the first or last Grey sister to be sent to Adoma's capital, but she had come closer to the queen than any of the others than any other of the order had managed in a long time. Close enough to stand within her court in the guise of a Noi Gwyn and listen to the queen hold forth to her nobles. There's this guy, Yamrala, who is described as like, always like wearing red mostly. And he is particularly, Kettle says, he may look weak and foolish, but when he turns his gaze your way, it's as if he's uncoiling every secret you own, and where he steps, the ground is left smoking. Pray the Sithral's wars in the east keep the fist on Ald's borders rather than our own. So Adoma is described as a tall woman, blunt-faced, solid, conveying a sense of physical power, of barely suppressed energies. Black-haired, a frothing mass of curls contained by hoops of gold, her pale skin stained and streaked as if rubbed with fresh ink. This, the Sithral said, was Adoma's sacrifice. In order to secure the strength to lead her people to victory, she had dared the black ice and been marked by it. I am super curious about that, because at first my instinct was, oh, she's got devils in her. But it's not described as moving around. It's described as a scar, like a mark on her. So that's different. And I don't know what to think of that, you know? And it says, however inspiring her speeches might be, the truth of the Battle Queen lay in the black ice, that place of horror where even Kettle had lost her way, and from where Adoma was said to gain her power. Kettle would share no memories of that darkness, only the conviction that nothing save evil could come from it. Oh, you guys, I am absolutely desperate to know what the fuck is going on with the black ice and why she is so, like, frightened of it. It's gotta be bad if Kettle is that afraid of it. And speaking of devils, we have the conversation between Zol and Nona about them. And Zol basically, first of all, confirms my suspicions that there are more ship hearts under the ice, that they don't have them all, and they're stupid to have thought they did. Secondly, she says, it seems it might take a ship heart from each of the bloods to wholly purify us, or perhaps it's just me who needs that. And it turns out what she says is that, like, in her culture, they would shake loose demons that were basically impurities of the spirit, as she calls it. And then you would use a ship heart to get rid of them, to burn them and give them up. And she describes this as being, quote, hard, which Nona is like, if this bitch says that shit is hard, that means it would kill most people. And she did it to a point where she thought that since she had tried it with, like, I think she says 12 ship hearts, it's a lot. And there were no more devils coming out of her. She thought she was done. But then this ship heart brought another one to the surface that she didn't know was there. And she says that the one that Nona had was different. She says the one Nona had was called Klaulathu, which is of the missing, an echo of the missing. The one she has is an echo of her. Oh, I'm sorry. Owen is texting me. And she is really, like, cryptic about exactly how that went down or what it means. Nona asks her if she thinks that's why she didn't have any threads, and I completely forgot that was a thing when they tried to do thread work, that she didn't have any. And maybe she's right. Like, Zol doesn't answer her or give her any, like, feedback on that. Let's see. No, she didn't. It wasn't 12 ship hearts. It was 12 devils, I think. When ice speakers find a child that can approach the old stones, they test them, which is what they call ship hearts. Old stones. And each new Raulathu takes longer to split from a person than the one before and is more difficult to purge. I gave 12 to the fire. It was hard to do. And she says that she was 9. And at 9, the ice speaker banished her to the corridor and didn't say why. My uncle took me to the Empire margins. I was sold to Scherzel's agent in a village called Shard. That rings a bell. Have we heard of Shard before? And this is interesting that Zol had a similar thing where she was sold and that she didn't really understand why this was all happening to her, that there was, like, something external influencing her life in this way that she had no control over. She was a child, you know? So then when we go to chapter 8, we have her and Ara working on this what do you call it? Chest. And she does manage to unlock it and take the book out. However, there are some things in here that she's not sure the order that they go back in, because when she looks on the floor, there's like a pressed flower and she doesn't know which book it fell out of. And she puts it back in a hurry and is hoping that she's right, but there's really no way to know. And the part of the reason that they are confident in doing this is that they assume Sister Pan doesn't read this book every day, doesn't always so it probably won't even be noticed that it's gone for a while. And if she does, it's a forbidden book. So she won't be able to raise a hue and cry about it because she's not supposed to have it. That said, I can't help but wonder if there isn't a thread or something of Nona's that can be traced to this place, that they won't find out her and Ara and Jula were here. I don't know. So when they come out, it's the next morning and, classes are starting. They had no idea that they were gone so long. No wonder Jula was like, I'm about to bounce. And they go to shade class with the poisoner and they're late. And they're waiting for so much of this chapter for their punishment. And there are a couple things that they think it could be. At one point, they're given these boxes of wires that Nona is certain were poisoned. With the size, she took a cloth from her pocket. Poison on the kits, Ara. Sister Apple had worked fast, probably with boneless resin, touching a few of the key components. So they think that they've figured it out. She tried to poison them. They noticed. They got around it. They don't have to worry about it. However, what they're doing is wire work, and it's essentially wires that are so thin that they can easily slice through you, slice you in half, probably. Go through bone, no problem. And they are learning how to set them for traps in a way that should somebody see the first one, they might not be able to miss the second one. Or should they see the first two, they will fall into the third one in trying to avoid the first two, etc. And they set them up, and then the poisoner is like, all right, well, we're going to have you guys go through that and try and escape to the other side without getting sliced up in the dark. And the first two to go in are going to be the two who were late. And the problem is that you're supposed to be able to see in the dark if you can do shade work. But, spoiler, Nona cut her shadow away from her. So she can't do that shade work, and so she cannot see in the dark. She used to be able to with Kiat, and she doesn't have Kiat anymore. So all she has is her memory of where they put things, which she didn't keep super close track because she didn't know this was going to be their test. And she has the ability to look at the path thread of where things are. And that's what she uses. And once she begins, it's clear that the poisoner did not intend for her to test. She intended Nona to beg off and let go of her ambition to become, what was it? She wants to be a red sister, correct? And basically was expecting Nona to drop her class. And Nona is just like, well, fuck you, I'm going to do this. Even though it's potentially could kill her. This is a really dangerous mission she's sending them on. And once Nona jumps in there, Apple is like, wait, what the fuck? But it's too late. She started. And she manages to make it to the other side. And she cuts herself, but only one spot on her leg. It's enough blood loss that she passes out. But she makes it. And she makes it within the given time frame. And I can't help wondering what other obstacles there are going to be that she has to overcome, that really they all think that it would be better for her to just pick something else. So yeah, that was the last chapter. And I really like the fact that she's found an alternate way to see in the dark, and it's more difficult and trickier. And she needs to have seen things without, she needs to have used the path to look at things before she tries to use this method. That's why she can see what the wires are, because she attempts to look at the wires with that kind of sight, because she's curious whether or not her father is entangled in there at all, because he was one of the people who went and got the metals to make these kinds of wires, which can only be made with arc steel. And so that has sort of burned them into her mind, what they look like. And that's why she's able to do this. And it would be kind of cool if that became something that functioned for her as an alternate like being able to see in the dark. But yeah, so that's pretty much everything. And I'm right on time. So I'm going to wrap up. Thank you again, Martin, very much for commissioning this episode. I'm really curious about this book because it's structured in such a way that it keeps me really on my toes. I don't know where we're going. So I'm very excited to see what happens. All right, everybody. Well, thank you again so much. Martin says next one in a month, then the last 5 pretty close together. Gotcha. All right. Thank you for letting me know about that too, because that can help me plan things a little bit. I won't listen to the next chapters right away, so that way they'll be fresh. All right, guys. Thank you again, and I will see you soon. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.